heat waves, drought, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, blizzards, bitter cold. Extreme weather has an incredible impact on people across the globe. On Mount Washington, our scientists brave some of the worst weather on the planet to improve our understanding of our warming world. All right, good evening and welcome everyone to Mount Washington Observatory's Science in the Mountains lecture series. My name is Brian Fitzgerald and I'm the Director of Education here at Mount Washington Observatory. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And for those of you who are brand new to the program, welcome. For those of you who have joined before, welcome back. So glad to have you with us tonight. As you know, to join us this evening is a weather forecaster from the aviation community. In fact, he's the meteorologist-in-charge at the National Weather Service's Center Weather Service Unit based in Nashua, New Hampshire. His name is Scott Reynolds. He'll be joining us in just a bit. For those of you who aren't familiar with this series or Mount Washington Observatory, don't forget we are a nonprofit member-supported organization with a mission to advance the understanding of the forces that create Earth's weather and climate. And the way we do that is through our weather operations with around-the-clock weather observation and forecasting, by conducting research and product testing projects, and by developing and offering innovative educational programs. If you have questions for tonight's speaker and you're joining us through Zoom, make sure you use the Q&A button. You can find that right down just at the bottom of your toolbar there on Zoom. If you're joining us on Facebook, well, you probably aren't joining us live tonight, and apologies for those folks who wanted to join that way live. Unfortunately, weren't able to get this stream up this evening with some changes in security from the Facebook side of things, but we'll get that video posted up and will be available at our YouTube page as well. If we don't get to any questions tonight, certainly feel free to follow up after the program. You can always reach out and contact us through education@mountwashington.org. And if you'd like to sign up for a future program, you can find out more information about signing up for those programs as well over at mountwashington.org/SITM. Alrighty, so let's get things going, and I'll actually launch a nice poll that we put together for you tonight with a couple questions from myself and also from our speaker this evening. So for those of you joining on Zoom, you will see a set of poll questions coming up here. Curious on that first question, where you're joining from. Perhaps it's a state within New England. Perhaps you're joining from outside of New England. Perhaps you're joining from outside of the country. Welcome, welcome to all of you. Second question, always curious if you've joined Science in the Mountains before, one of our programs previously. Perhaps yes, many times, maybe just a couple or a few times before, or maybe this is the very first program, and if so, welcome. And then a couple trivia questions from our speaker this evening. First off, what year were the Center Weather Service units first opened? Anywhere between 1976 or 1980? You can guess, and our speaker will cover that later on this evening. And then here's a good question here. In fact, I had a hard time with this one myself. You get to choose two choices here. Name the last two hurricanes to make landfall in New England. Was it Bob in 91, Ida in 2021, Henri in 2021, Gloria in 85, Sandy in 2011, Irene in 2011, or Floyd in 1999? That's a toughie. All righty, I see quite a few of you participating. We'll give it another 5 or 6 seconds here for everyone to get your results in. All righty, and 3, 2, 1, and we'll go ahead and end that poll. All right, thanks to all of you who participated. Appreciate that. Looks like there's a neck and neck tie between New Hampshire and Massachusetts this evening. Welcome to all of you. Good representation throughout New England, and over a quarter of you joining from outside of New England as well. And in fact, a couple of you will give the shout out outside of the country. Thanks so much for joining tonight, or whatever time it is, wherever you're joining from. For those of you joining Science in the Mountains previously, more than half of you, yes, many times. Hey, thanks so much for continuing on with the series. Love to see lots of familiar names and faces come back time after time. And for those of you brand new to the program, more than 10% of you, hey, welcome. Hope you join us for some future programs as well. All right, on to the trivia. What was the year that the Center Weather Service units were first opened? Most of you said 1978, well, or 1976. We'll see. Scott will answer that for us later on. And then here was the tough one. What were the last two hurricanes to make landfall in New England? Well, most of you said Sandy in 2011, and then there was a tie between Bob and Irene, and then a good mix all around there. Well, I don't know. I don't know that answer, to be perfectly honest, and we'll just have to wait, see, and listen here. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing that, and at this time, I'd love to welcome our speaker for this evening, Scott Reynolds. Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing all right for an old guy.
Hey, thanks so much for joining. I appreciate it. I didn't even ask. Where are you joining from this evening?
From the home office in Nashua, New Hampshire. And when I say home office, I mean the home office.
Snowing there yet?
Bite your tongue when you say that. No, it is not yet. That will come soon enough, I'm sure.
Yeah, it only struck me that once we started here that, oh, I hope you're not getting called in for any sort of special duty this evening or anything like that. But I'm sure you'll talk more about that and times when you do have to get called into the office.
Happily, it doesn't happen often, but it seems to be a lot lately. So,
yeah.
All right.
Well, Scott, I'd love for you to, take it away. We'd love to learn all about your work and the work of the Center Weather Service unit. So thanks so much for joining, and I'll be quiet now.
All right. Hopefully everybody can see the screen with weather forecasting for the aviation community and beyond on there.
Yeah, it looks great.
All right, perfect. All right, well, at least that part of the technology is working tonight. So, all right. First of all, thanks to Brian for the invite. I have never done this before. I am a first timer with this series. I will not be a last timer for this series, I'm pretty sure. So let's get right into things here. First things first, anybody has any questions, please, throw something in the chat or whatever between Brian and me. We'll keep an eye on it. I don't mind answering questions as we go along. In fact, it's probably better that way. I will not entertain any questions about my choice of professional football teams right now, other than to say we stunk on Sunday, and that's that. I am a native Western New Yorker, so that means I am a long-suffering Bills fan. We'll see how the rest of this year goes. This is my second stint in New Hampshire. I went to Plymouth State back when it was Plymouth State College, way back in the dark ages of the 1980s. Proud Panther, one of the earlier graduates of the meteorology program at Plymouth State. Not the first, but we were still a pretty young program at that point. And then I've been talking about doing a master's degree for the longest time, longer than I'm going to admit to. And finally, my wife said, "What are you waiting for? It's time to do it." So old guy got his master's degree in emergency management from Millersville. Finished up the program just about 2 years ago. We may talk a little bit about some of the stuff with that. And certainly during Q&A time, we can bring that up. I've been a meteorologist with the National Weather Service since 1988, which again is just further proof that I am an old guy here. My path back to New Hampshire, I actually did a volunteer stint when the Weather Service had an office in Concord, New Hampshire, up at the airport. Actually, one of the individuals that I worked with me at the Center Weather Service unit, or the CWSU as I will call it, more than a few times tonight. Mr. Lundstedt worked with me for about 16 years. He just retired last fall. Lucky guy. Spent a little time in Albany. My first full-time gig was 2 days after graduation, Burlington, Vermont. Went to Charleston, West Virginia for a couple of years right after getting married. That drastic a move right after getting married, probably not the best thing, but honestly, it was the best thing for my wife and me. Then I spent 10 years on Long Island at the New York City Forecast Office as a senior forecaster. And then this opportunity came up in 2005, and I have been the MIC, which is short for Meteorologist-in-Charge, at the CWSU since November of 2005. And then actually a little trivia note, it is 17 years and 1 day since I returned to New Hampshire for this gig. So it's nice to be back. I really missed New Hampshire all those years. Never dreamt that I would ever get an opportunity to come back. And well, glad to be here. So let's go back to our poll questions here, and maybe Brian can help me out because, you know, I didn't write any numbers down. I think the majority of the answers barely were 1978 and 1976. Is that correct, sir?
Yes, sir.
All right. The actual proper answer is 1978. For those of you that said 1976, you're just a little ahead of your time. We had a big party in that country that year for the bicentennial, but the CWSUs were 2 years away from coming into existence. The CWSUs, we are a very specialized part of the National Weather Service. I won't read all the words on the screen, you can do that, but we provide weather support to the 21 air route traffic control centers operated by the FAA, one of which, of course, is in Nashua. If you've never noticed it, it's a kind of looking brick building just to the north of exit 4 on the Everett Turnpike. Once upon a time, there actually used to be a sign for the exit ramps saying FAA Center, and then some little event called 9/11 happened, and well, they took the sign down. We are all about aviation weather. That is not to say that we don't care about what's going on and you know, in other realms, what's going on in the offshore waters, things like that. But you know, everything that we do is very much aviation focused. The Mount Washington observations are very key to us, especially in the wintertime. So yes, we are looking at those observations. We basically, the CWSUs, we use every piece of data we can get our hands on. We do specialized forecast advisories for thunderstorms, turbulence, icing, precipitation, affecting the National Airspace System, which is the lower 48, Alaska. And actually we have airspace that, not Boston Center or Nashua, but we do have airspace that extends all the way to Puerto Rico and all the way out to Hawaii too. But other CWSUs cover those territories. We're strictly in the Northeast. You know, the NWS mission is pretty straightforward. Weather, water and climate data, forecast warnings, and the new thing, impact-based decision support services for the protection of life and property and the enhancement of the national economy. That's a mouthful. CWSU Nashua, it's all of that, but it's very specific for supporting safe air travel throughout the Northeast. And I do have a map coming up very shortly. In fact, right now, that shows our airspace. We are ZBW up there in the Northeast corner. Every CWSU's airspace is unique in some way, shape, or form. In ZBW, we have roughly 40 to 50% of our boundary is with Canada. Another 30% or so is oceanic boundaries. We share a boundary with New York Center, ZNY, and just a tiny little bit of a border with Oakland, with Cleveland Center or Oberlin, ZOB. But no two CWSUs are the same. We have the same staffing. Our hours are roughly the same. Our mission is roughly the same, but we're all a little different. New York Center, for instance, everything revolves around the big three there, Kennedy, LaGuardia, Newark. Boston Center, everything revolves around Logan, Boston Airport. But there's a big, one of the big things we deal with is all the international traffic to and from Europe every day that goes, the vast majority of it, over our airspace. You take a center like Kansas City, most of it is what we call overflight traffic. Yeah, they have St. Louis and Kansas City airports that are pretty decent sized airports, but most of the traffic is transient, headed for the West Coast or for the East Coast or wherever. Then there's Alaska, ZAN, Anchorage. They get a little bit of everything. They got one of the biggest airspaces, if not the biggest airspace in the program. And they get a little of everything. Anchorage is, a fairly busy airport, but they're all about dealing with all the smaller aircraft because let's face it, getting around Alaska aircraft is really the best way to do it because there's not as many highways there. So we're all a little different. We all have the same mission, but how we get there kind of varies. And that's one of the things about our program that is so unique that, every day is a little different. There's always something different going on. So our poll question, 1978, is the answer, of course. And the reason for the existence of the CWSUs is back in 1977 during the summer, we had an aircraft accident north of Atlanta, Southern Flight 242, a DC-9. Aircraft flew into an intense part of a thunderstorm between air traffic control radar and onboard weather radar. They thought they were going between thunderstorms and they went right into the heart of a microburst. And the hail caused both engines to flame out. So obviously quite a few fatalities from that. And in the subsequent studies and reports that came out of it, the National Transportation Safety Board, who we do work with on occasion for things like this, recommended that the Weather Service and the FAA get together and set up 3-person weather units in some of the air route traffic control centers, or ARTCs. There's another acronym. You'll get sick of my acronyms probably in the next 5 minutes. There will be a ton of them tonight. They opened up 13 ARTCs, ARTC CWSUs, and then over the course of the rest of the year and the next year, they opened up the other 8. We were one of the first ones to open up. We opened up in April of '78 with 3 meteorologists, and then the 4th position, the Meteorologist-in-Charge. My predecessor was hired in 1982, where he served until he retired in 2005. So it's not the biggest airspace in the world, but it certainly has its challenges. So the map on the left shows kind of the geographical layout of our airspace. And if you know anything about the weather, you can kind of pick out where the challenges are going to be. You've got plenty of mountains, the Adirondacks, the Greens, the Whites, and the rest of the Appalachians all the way up into Maine. You've got valleys, the Hudson Valley, the Connecticut Valley. You've got coastal areas running from down East Maine all the way down to Long Island. And yes, that's the way they say it down there. We have lake effect snow. I actually caught wind of a forecast. My team will be playing in the snow on Sunday because it looks like the lake effect machine will be cranking up in Buffalo just in time for Cleveland to come to town. So there's plenty of challenges. At Boston, being a coastal location, anybody familiar with Boston is going to realize that, there's a lot of stuff going on in Boston. It could be snowing to beat the band here in Nashua and raining like hell in Boston. It's just kind of the way it is. Sometimes the rain snow line is on 495. Other times it's 128. Other times it's actually in Manchester, or usually it's in Merrimack, about halfway in between. So the FAA has their airspace divided up into 3 groupings. You have the ARTCs, of which my center is. Then below that, you have what we call the TRACONs, or the Terminal Radar Approach Controls. We'll talk about those just a little bit more in a second or two. And we have, I think it's 10 or 11 that we deal with on a pretty regular basis. A90, the Boston TRACON, which now includes the Cape sectors, or K90. That's the one we deal with the most because that's where all the traffic is in and out of Boston for the most part. And then, of course, we have all of the control towers underneath, and the map on the right shows at least a bunch of the towers. Now, we don't deal with most of those towers on a regular basis, but, every once in a while we get a phone call from a Lebanon or, a Messina or something like that. Hey, we need some assistance with something, and, that's what we're there for. We provide information for any type of weather that there is. The ceilings or the base of the clouds. That's actually a very important piece of the puzzle. We'll talk about that in a few minutes as well. Same with visibility. Nothing like a low clouds and fog event, come streaming in off Boston Harbor when it's, not expected to mess up your day. Winter weather, it is that time of year again where we have to start thinking about the S word and the other S word, the 5-letter one, sleet, freezing rain, things like that. We have to provide that information because that has a huge impact on how our traffic operations work. Winds in general and wind shear, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Turbulence and icing, these are all things that we're looking at on a regular basis, some days more so than others. So as I mentioned, we have multiple weather regimes at any given time. It could be sunny and 60 and at Bradley in Windsor Locks, Connecticut. It could be snowing like crazy up in northern Maine and Presque Isle. It could be fogged in Portland, or in raining like crazy with fog at Nantucket. Boston could have a sea breeze, and there could be freezing rain or something like that going on somewhere else. So it's rarely a dull moment in our world. That's kind of the way we do it. It's a fast-paced operation, especially when, the worse the weather, the quicker we got to move on things, because people need that information. Air traffic controllers are making decisions. And the biggest, maybe one of the bigger challenges we have is most of the time there's just one of us on. There's only 4 of us in the first place, and we're a 16/7 operation. So, it's, you learn how to make decisions really quickly. I've been known to call it forecasting by the seat of your pants. There are forecasters that I've known that are terrific forecasters that would not be able to do what we do, because you have to make fast decisions. And sometimes you don't even have to verbalize things, and they know whether you're 100% confident on a forecast or you're just giving them something to give them something. It is one of the best parts or worst parts of the job, sometimes both, is you give a forecast, and if you get it wrong, go fix it. You just got to fix it quick sometimes, though. The challenges, the oceanic and international airspace borders that we have. Another huge challenge we have, while they're not technically in our airspace, the New York metros are major influences on the operations in our building. Not so much the weather side of it, but the weather at Kennedy, Newark, and LaGuardia certainly impact how New York Center, New York TradeCon, and the individual towers are going to operate, and that has an impact on the entire NAS, not just us, but everybody. It can impact the West Coast as well. And another challenge we have that any meteorology student or any weather geek out there is going to understand this one. There is so much data out there to look at. You simply cannot look at it all. Many have tried, few have succeeded. I don't know how they do it. You learn to pick and choose what you look at, I guess. So I'll take a quick time out to take a breath and a quick sip of hot coffee. Are there any questions up to this point?
This is fascinating, Scott. I see one question just so far. Andrew's asking if the CWSUs are physically co-located with Boston Center or with the Artsies, I guess.
Yes, we are embedded right in the control room. I have to walk about 50 feet to get to the traffic management unit, who are, if you want to call them this, they are our primary customers. They're the ones we deal with the most. So air traffic control is a great question, Andrew. Air traffic control is the way it's set up. You have those multiple layers that we were talking about. There's actually a group outside of Washington, D.C. at what is affectionately called the command center. They're the chief planners. So they bring everybody together every 2 hours, and they figure out, okay, where are the problems going to be? And how are we going to plan to deal with it? Because if you got a line of thunderstorms coming through Fort Worth during one of the big rush hours or something like that, well, you're going to have big problems. It's like a snowstorm, coming through at heavy snow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Boston. You just totally screwed up the Boston operations with that, or no, Mother Nature did. We just forecast it. We're the messengers. We can go and talk to any of the controllers or any of the supervisors anywhere within the control room. It's, it's a 10-second walk down to the other side of the room. So we are physically in the building, right there with them. Now the TRACONs and the towers, obviously those are going to be phone briefings. 16/7 open hours. So we're actually 15.5 hours. We open up at 5:30 in the morning and we shut down at 9 o'clock, assuming that we don't need to stay late for whatever reasons. And this time of year, that's pretty rare. If we have to stay late, it's certainly, it's almost certainly going to be thunderstorm related or some other kind of flight emergency. Do we follow individual planes for where they will encounter weather? No, we leave that to the air traffic controllers. We try to give the controllers and the supervisors a real good idea where the problems are going to be. The individual planes, we have some capabilities to listen in on air traffic conversations, but we rarely do it, especially in busy weather because we've got enough other stuff to do as it is. But we have a lot of conversations with all of the different entities within the building, trying to get people safely from point A to point B. Tell them where the turbulence is. Tell them where the icing is. Somebody gets in trouble, try to get them, tell them, hey, go here. This will get you out of it. Analytics. You know what? I want to hold off on that last question there for a little bit. I need to think about that one a little bit.
Scott, I think we have some rather curious individuals here that may or may not have interests in aviation and beyond. So you're going to be in for it here.
Thanks for the warning. Do PIREPs directly come to us? Actually, they're not directly to us. They do. They come through the controllers or through the traffic management unit or TMU. There's another acronym for you, or the flight data unit. We hear about, the more urgent PIREPs, severe turbulence, severe icing, low level wind shear, all of our favorites. We hear about them, but the PIREPs don't directly come to us. We have plenty of other things to do. Is there pressure to make decisions on forecasts because of economic reasons? Well, maybe in some people's world, not mine. Well, that's not totally true. Decision making, based on our experience. Now, I've been in the building for 17 years. Two of my forecasters arrived just about 10 years ago, and my third forecaster actually showed up in February of this year. But she had actually worked some time with us as a volunteer during her Plymouth State days a few years back. The economic reasons, they may be kind of almost like a subconscious thing. I'm not making a forecast based on, I need to save the FAA $500,000 on fuel or something like that. I let other people do that. My job is the weather. I tell them where the bad weather is going to be, where the good weather is going to be, and then I let the other people make the decisions because that's what they get paid for. I get paid for the weather part of it. So, the economic impacts, certainly that we're cognizant of that. And we know that a busted forecast can cost a lot of money, depending on the actual busted forecast. So, it's part of it, but it's not really part of it, I guess. Real-time pilot reports. Oh, absolutely. We do, Paul. That's, well, it ain't ground truth, it's air truth. You can't see turbulence, and we'll talk about that in a little bit too. You can see icing, but we can only figure, based on our data, we can say, okay, this is where we think it's going to happen, but we actually need some proof in the pudding. Where are things actually happening? So, okay, let's continue on. Boston can be a real pain in the butt some days and can be no problems whatsoever. So we look at our diagram here, and I colored 5 out of the 6 runways. Yes, I said 6. This is one of the challenges that we have with Boston. Notice that you got runways kind of running in 3 general directions here. You've got southwest to northeast, the yellow and the orange ones. Those are If you're landing from the northeast, those are runways 22 left and 22 right. If you're landing from the southwest, meaning you're coming over Providence and Norwood and Blue Hill, that's 4 left and 4 right. The blue runway there is runway 9 or 27. The numbering, think of it this way: pilots like headwinds. They don't like tailwinds, not when they're landing or taking off. They like a tailwind when they're up at 35,000 feet and you give them a little extra push, save some gas. And then you've got runway 32 and 14. 14 is rarely used because, in large part because there's a hotel sitting on the northwest end of that runway. And then 33, you got a pair of 33s. You got the little guy there that is, I don't know if you can see my mouse. I didn't color this one in here. It's only 2,500 feet long. Only the little guys are using that one. The green one here, 33 left, 15 right. That's the long runway, or the other long runway that gets a lot of use with the big boys. We are cognizant at all times what the winds are for Boston. We have a really good idea when Boston's going to be looking at making a runway change, when the winds change to certain windows, direction and speed, actually. And then you have to take the ceiling and the visibility into it as well. So it's not a simple thing. You take some airports, like I'll use LaGuardia Airport. There's 2 runways and they are perpendicular to each other. One northwest southeast, the other one southwest northeast. Newark has 2 southwest northeast runways and one that's basically west and east. Kennedy's got a whole bunch. They got 4 or 5 runways. I forget exactly how many they have. Not my airspace, usually my problem. The smaller airports usually have 2 runways. Once in a while they have 3, and occasionally they only have 1. So, wind forecasts become incredibly important, especially for the bigger airports, because if they're not in a favorable runway configuration, that's going to slow down the arrival rate, which then can, have the potential of screwing things up all across the NAS. I found this graphic a number of years ago, thanks to USA Today for this one. Why, you may say, okay, it is perfectly sunny. It's a beautiful day in Boston. Why am I delayed? Well, it may not be Boston. That's the problem. It may be where you're headed to, or it may be where your plane is coming from. If you have reduced visibilities, lower ceilings, precipitation falling, you have to spread the aircraft out during landing and takeoffs. Well, in an ideal situation with Boston, the best arrival rate that they have is 61 aircraft per hour. They're using 2 runways for arrivals and 2 for departures, the 4s and runway 9. And it's a beautiful thing to watch the controllers do this. It's rare that they get 61 aircraft an hour these days. They haven't had that since 9/11. But that's the capacity that the airport has. Well, the minute you drop the ceiling down, or you lower the visibility, or you changed wind direction, you're looking at either a lower arrival rate and or a runway change. And not all runway configurations are created equal. If the winds are out of the southwest, the maximum arrival rate's 48. You got 40 aircraft coming in that hour. Life is good. Drop, you got a northeast wind, like I said, 61 rate. You drop the ceiling down to 1,500. Let's use a different number. You drop that ceiling down to about 3,000 feet. Your arrival rate just dropped down to 36 or 38. If you got 40 aircraft coming into that hour, you got a problem. Somebody's going to have to go into holding. Holding costs money. I forget the exact number, but it's something like $82,000 a minute. It may actually be more than that, but it's not cheap. And that's just for the aircraft. If you take people into consideration, the passengers and what their time is calculated to be, delays get into the hundreds of $1,000s per minute. So there's your economic impacts. And, so we try to give the information as far in advance as reasonably possible. Hey, you're gonna have a lower rate, or you're going to have you're going to have to change runways. You know, the idea is to give them that information as early as possible so they can plan for it. And if they've got too many aircraft coming in at a particular hour, then they plan for it. You know, maybe they put in some kind of traffic management initiative, you know, slow some aircraft down, delay some on the ground a little bit. You know, it's really interesting to have seen the evolution of this over the years. All of this was done by hand when I first got there in late 05. And now all of the planning on, okay, so I can space the aircraft out a certain way. That's all now done by a computer program. And still watching the TMU controllers work this and get the aircraft in and out of there to keep the delays minimal. It's really a thing to see. And we can really see the impact that we have on the operations as far as the airports are concerned. And that's the same for any airport, not just Boston. We all know thunderstorms are a huge issue because no aircraft likes to fly anywhere near thunderstorms for any number of different reasons. You know, just from this graphic here, a few of the things. You got icing, you got turbulence. Under the storm, you got low ceilings, IFR instrument flight rules, low IFRs, low instrument flight rules, very low for the VL IFR. Microburst, heavy rain, or other things, and snow. These are all things that, you know, impact, you know, the route of air traffic travel. And, you know, the FAA doesn't like surprises. So, you know, we do what we can to give them as much advance notice. You know, we give them the information and then they hopefully make the right decisions from there. Of course, we have winter weather. It is that time of year. There are winter weather advisories up for parts of New England tonight into tomorrow. Some of us are less than thrilled about that. Hopefully not too many blizzards coming up, and certainly none in the next couple of days, but it's only November. So we all know how that works in New England. I found this and I had to include it because, you know, where I grew up in Western New York, you know, it's like, yeah, I think we got more than 4 seasons here too, but we got nothing on New England, a minimum of 12 seasons. And I can, you know, make the argument that there's more than that some years. I think we're in actual fall right now with a taste of winter coming. So, you know, it'll be interesting to see how everything pans out. You know, and we remind our air traffic friends that, you know, things change quickly in New England. So, you know, sometimes it's wait 15 minutes and you'll get what you need, or you'll get something different, not necessarily what they need. Of course, ice and snow are huge things. Freezing rain and sleet are 2 phrases that air traffic control and pilots hate to hear. You don't need to put any more ice on an aircraft than you already get when they're flying in and around through clouds. And of course, there's nothing like a good old fashioned snowstorm to screw up an airport. The 2 longest runways for Boston are over 10,000 feet. For those who are keeping score at home, that's 2 miles, give or take. And you can see just how much work needs to be done to clear just one section of a runway, let alone the whole thing. And, you know, it is not like the roads where you just, you know, you scrape off what you can and then throw some sand and salt down and call it a day. They really prefer pavement because you're landing aircraft that actually weigh a lot. And, you know, another reason why they spread the aircraft out during landing, you don't need aircraft getting right on top of each other when they're, you know, doing their thing. Winds and wind shear, another big thing. And as I mentioned earlier, the biggest problem we have here is you can't see it. There are hints in our satellite imagery. There are certainly hints in our computer model guidance, but you can't see turbulence. And there are certain things that we have to look out for to determine, okay, these are the most likely areas for turbulence. We've got some techniques that we have discovered over the years. And I won't say we developed them because we basically stumbled on them. And they do a pretty good job in pointing out areas where there may be turbulence. And then we can dig a little deeper in the data, say, all right, so we think it'll be moderate, we think it'll be severe. Another inherent problem with turbulence is I might think that this bouncing around that we're getting on this flight on 737 from Southwest Airlines is moderate turbulence. Ryan might be on a different aircraft. He might be on a 777 and it's just a couple of light bumps. Somebody might be on, a Learjet or something like that. It might be severe. There's how you classify turbulence is basically a lot of it is dictated by the person actually observing it or being a part of it. And it also varies by aircraft. Some aircraft do better than others with turbulence. So we're looking at changes in wind speed, changes in wind direction. And if you have changes in both over a short distance, that's usually a pretty good sign that you're going to have some pretty nasty turbulence to deal with. And I found this cartoon a number of years ago, and I hope this isn't true, but who knows? I just threw this in there because I actually thought it was kind of, you get the idea, the plane is pitching and yawing a little bit, and then all of a sudden it levels out and you're out of the turbulence. So, oh, by the way, you have to have a sense of humor in this job because we're meteorologists, that's just kind of the way it is. So, we talked about it. The turbulence intensity, there's some numbers that go with it, but it's still pretty objective as far as the person reporting it is concerned. You get those big drops in, in your altitude there, 30 meters or, roughly 100 feet. You're going to have problems in, a couple times a year across the country. There's always a couple of reports, severe turbulence, even from a 777, one of the big boys, flight attendants are getting hurt, passengers getting hurt because they hit turbulence. Sometimes it was forecast, sometimes it wasn't. And it's just one of those things, you can't see it. So, we do the best we can with, with what we have to work with. Icing. You can see the icing to some extent. And, we forecast, again, try to forecast the areas where the icing is most likely to occur. We've got certain techniques that work with this. We get guidance from the Aviation Weather Center. It's one of the national forecast centers of the Weather Service. They are located out in Kansas City. They provide forecast information and advisories to the aviation community, which we pass along to our air traffic types, highlighting areas where there may be icing or turbulence or low level wind shear. And then, we can put out, basically the aviation equivalent of a warning, a center weather advisory from the CWSUs or a SIGMET, significant meteorological information statement. Basically it's our warning. Think of that as the SIGMET is the aviation equivalent to a severe thunderstorm warning. It's out there. We expect it to be happening or it will be happening shortly, kind of a thing. You don't get a lot of those, but we are coming into the time of the year where that is incredibly important information for air traffic purposes. So let me give you a little example of how this works. You're flying from Boston to Chicago. The pilots are going to talk to somewhere in the vicinity of about 30 different air traffic controllers between Boston and Chicago. Our airspace is divided up into 5 areas. Each area is divided up into 6 sectors. Some of them are high level, some of them are low level, and depending on how high up in the atmosphere the plane is flying will dictate the number of controllers that they talk to. But pre-flight, you're talking to ground ops. During the takeoff, in the landing, you are talking to the controllers in the air traffic control towers, say Logan Airport or O'Hare, you're talking to the tower controllers. Departure, descent, well, not so much descent, but departure and approach, you're talking to the terminal radar approach controllers, the TRACON controllers, the ones up in Merrimack. Chicago TRACON is somewhere on the southwest side of the city, I believe. But there are, and then the en route and the descent, you're talking to air traffic controllers from the different ARTCs. From Boston to Chicago on a normal day, they're going to talk to Boston Center, they're going to talk to Cleveland Center, they're going to probably talk to Indy Center, and they're almost certainly going to talk to Chicago Center, at least briefly anyway. That's just 4 centers, and there's multiple controllers in each center that they talk to. So it's very possible they're going to talk to, upwards of 24 controllers just over the course of that flight. And again, the planning efforts are led by our crew down in Warrenton, Virginia. It's not a simple system. So the CWSUs, we have a lot of people that we work with. Putting out a forecast is not exactly what one would be simple, and providing weather support is far from simple too, because there's so many people. And as I just talked about, there's so many different levels of air traffic control that they have that has to be dealt with. So of course we have all of our partners within our building, whether it's the traffic management, it's the individual areas. We have the TRACON, we have the controllers at Logan. There's the other towers and the TRACONs in our airspace, which we don't hear from them a lot, but we do hear from them. We partner with our parent forecast office down in Boston Norton on the south side of Boston. They put out the Boston specific forecast. They also do all the public and the marine forecasting for all of southern New England, except basically the northwestern third or whatever it is of Connecticut and the Berkshires of Massachusetts. They have the rest of southern New England. The Gray Maine office covers all of New Hampshire and about half of Maine. Caribou covers the other half. We have the Aviation Weather Center out in Kansas City, I mentioned before. And then we actually have, in essence, a CWSU at the command center, and they are feeding information to the planners in order, and then working with us to make sure that everybody's on the same page as far as, planning purposes. So what's needed? Well, every last piece of information you could possibly get. Pilots need to know the ceilings, the visibilities, and the weather for departures and landings. You need the winds for the entire route. Am I going to hit headwinds at 35,000 feet on my trip to Chicago? Well, if I do, I'm going to have to put more gas in the plane. If you got a nice tailwind, maybe you need a little less gas. It's a lot of information to provide in a short amount of time, and to try to keep it as simple as we possibly can. So I'm going to take another quick stop here. If there's any other questions, I see Tom's got one in there from a few minutes ago. Sorry for ignoring it. AI involved with planning. Not, if you want to call the computer guidance, from the models, artificial intelligence, which calling it intelligence some days is a stretch, then yes, AI is involved with planning, but it's still the meteorologist interpreting the weather information, and then the air traffic community interpreting what we give them, plus dealing with all of the, all of their knowns and unknowns. How many flights you got coming across, coming in and out of Boston at a certain time, how many flights coming in from Europe, how many flights are headed down, down the East Coast, down to Florida, which, oh, by the way, they can't fly that way because the military is out playing games and shut down part of the airspace. That's kind of a regular occurrence. Those are things that the weather doesn't deal with, but, we provide them with the information as needed on that. So hopefully that answered that question a little bit. Reports at regular times or changes in condition as conditions warrant or requested. The answer to that question is simply yes. We have scheduled briefings, we have unscheduled briefings, we have scheduled forecast issuances, we have unscheduled forecast updates. On a really quiet day, everything's working the way it's supposed to be. The other Sunday, we use Sunday. I worked Sunday day shift. I did 1, 2, 3 scheduled briefings. I issued 1, 2, 3 scheduled forecasts. I actually did update one forecast because I missed something, and freely admit it, and a couple of video briefings. So that's a quiet day. But on a busy day, I might be wearing a path in the carpet back and forth just between the weather unit and the traffic management unit, hey, one of the thunderstorms going to get not, and it's not just getting thunderstorms to Boston, as you'll see in the example I'm going to show here in just a minute. It's, you know, where the thunderstorm's going to be in certain points in the airspace that feed the traffic into or out of Boston, or into or out of New York. Traffic going in and out of the Northeast headed for Europe. You know, this is all information that's important, and some of it's scheduled and some of it's not. You know, you update it as needed because Mother Nature does not pay attention to our forecasts. Try as I might over 34 years, it doesn't happen. One of these days, maybe she'll learn. Probably not. All right, so I want to give you an example of, well, it was, it wasn't one of my better nights, and I admit this, but I learned from it. You know, this is a beautiful thing, and I'm pretty sure there's a few meteorology students from Plymouth State on the call tonight. And those of you who are taking my class in the spring, I will pick on you later, maybe. We learn not so much, I won't say mistakes, but things that don't quite pan out the way they're supposed to or the way you think they're going to. And this first example here is an absolutely perfect example of how things didn't work out quite the way they're supposed to be. Late October, seemed like I had the evening shift. That's a 1 to 9 shift, those keeping score at home. Cold front coming in from the west, few bands of showers. That's the SHRA. Sorry, more contractions and abbreviations. Can't help myself. COSPA is a piece of intelligence that MIT Lincoln Labs developed for the FAA. They take every radar information that they can get, FAA radars, Canadian radars, NWS radars. They put it all together and they process it. And then every 5 minutes, you get a new forecast that goes out to either 2 or 8 hours. It's a beautiful thing when it's accurate, which most of the time it is. And it looked like there would be some showers in and around Logan Airport around 0Z. Eastern Daylight Time, that's 8 p.m. Very valuable lesson learned this particular night, that the model that drives the forecast out of that particular piece of intelligence is not always a really good, reliable model. Some days it's good, some days it's not. While it had some of the right ideas, the location and intensity area errors, cut down on the lead time for planning and for reaction to what was going on. Tough lesson to learn, but I learned a few things that night. So on the left-hand side, maybe a little tough to see here, just some basic showers. Now the numbers that you see in the white boxes, those are tops to the clouds in hundreds of feet. So, you know, with the exception of a couple of tops here from about westerly Rhode Island down to the North Fork of Long Island, most of the tops are, 20 to 25,000 feet. They're showers. Nobody cares. A couple of tops to 34,000 feet. Now, 1945 Zulu is 3:45 p.m. And the reason that is important is that's when we do one of our scheduled briefings for all of the managers and supervisors in the building every day. I had the briefing that night and I said, yeah, okay, there's some thunderstorms offshore. They should stay offshore. We're just gonna have some showers running around Boston. It really shouldn't impact things too much. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you got a 2-hour and a 4-hour forecast. And, by just before 8 p.m., yeah, you got some heavier showers across southeastern New England. No big deal, right? Not so fast, my friends, because, well, those thunderstorms fired up. Now, notice how long it takes for them to get to Boston. This is 9 o'clock. There's 10 o'clock in the evening right there. And Boston is like right where the cursor is. I hope you can see it. Notice that the thunderstorms are just to the west of the airport. You could not get traffic in and out of Boston for that, for a good chunk of that night. So I'm going to play it again here, or try to. No, being grumpy. So there is 5 p.m. You got big showers, and there are actually some lightning strikes, especially, down here along coastal Connecticut, Long Island. This was my first sign that this forecast was going south quickly. And well, there's nothing in Boston. What's the problem? Well, the traffic coming into Boston comes along. Think of the Route 2 corridor across northern Massachusetts, right through, northern part of the state. There's nothing there yet, but about 15 minutes after this snapshot, there was thunderstorms. I'm trying to think near Tingsboro, for those that know that neck of the woods. And that effectively shut off the arrivals into Boston, coming from the Albany area and points off to the west. They have to send them up further north. Longer trip, more gas. There's more thunderstorms further to the south here. There's also an approach route that comes through southern Connecticut, goes right over Providence. And then depending on the winds, either come straight into Boston or they go out east of Boston, do a U-turn near Portsmouth, and then go hot-footing it right into Boston. Well, that got shut down pretty quickly too. There was basically the only way to get into Boston for several hours this particular evening was to fly way off to the north across Maine, come south, and then come in from Boston Harbor, come in from the east side. It's a lot of extra flying. And then how do you get the aircraft out of Boston? Because at some point you're going to run out of parking spaces. That's a legitimate problem. So you learn to, what I learned that particular night was all the ways in and out of Boston that I wasn't totally clear on. Now I do. And then you take here's another example. I did not work this event. I should have stayed late. I did not. One of my newer forecasters had been there for less than 2 years. Less than 2 years. Well, this is 7 p.m. And most of the white you see that not boxes there is lightning. The noticeable thing here is notice that there's no thunderstorms within about 50 miles of New York City or Boston. The problem is no traffic could get to Boston or New York because of all these thunderstorms extending from Maine, and they extended all the way down to about Roanoke, Virginia. We forecast this one really well, but you had multiple lines of thunderstorms. This picture here at 7 p.m., by the time you get to 9 p.m., look, you got thunderstorms building at 9 o'clock in the evening along the St. Lawrence River. There's no way for the traffic to get in and out of the Northeast. And then at 11 p.m., it just got progressively worse. This was a really long night at Boston Center for the Controllers. It was a really long night for the meteorologist on duty. I don't think he left until almost midnight that night. All right, so let's switch gears here just a little bit. Let's go to our poll question here. The last 2 hurricanes to make landfall in New England. Now, for my upperclassmen and grad students that are going to have me in the spring, here's a little hint. Always read the details in the question. It's a little bit of a trick question here. Landfalling hurricanes in New England. So that eliminates Sandy, because Sandy didn't make landfall in New England. Sandy was a little closer to New York City. Irene, let me see, actually, there is, I think it's the next slide. There we go. So the answers are Bob and Gloria. Ida was what we now call a post-tropical cyclone, and it dumped copious amounts of rain, especially in New York and southern New England. Henri was actually a tropical storm when it made landfall in southern New England. Gloria was a cat. It was a cat 1. Bob, for those that remember, just kind of grazed the southeastern part of Massachusetts, Cape and the Islands. All right, Lourdes. All right, we got it. Sandy, like I said, mid-Atlantic. Irene was a tropical storm and then did all of its damage, especially north and west of here. And Floyd was a tropical storm for most of its trek up the East Coast. Boatload of rain. The wind really, I was in the New York office at the time. There was 0 wind with that thing, at least where we were anyway. So I'll go back to Chris's question there. The colored dashed lines are various airways that are used. Some of them are jet routes. They've changed a little bit since those pictures were made. But those various jet routes, think of the jet routes there, which are actually now, I believe, called Q routes, because the FAA likes to change things. Think of it as an interstate system, but it's up at 35,000 feet. And there's other routes that would have been on those maps that would have been the approaches and departures in and out of the Boston area. So, you know, our poll question here on hurricanes, a little bit of a trick question just to see if anybody was paying attention. One of the biggest changes in my 34 years in this business, we're not just forecasters anymore. We've always been communicators, but the computer models in general are usually pretty good. Not always. It's still our job to figure out what's good and what isn't. But communicating the information, that's what I do. When I'm on the forecast shift at CWSU, that's my job. Communicating the information. You know, anybody can look at computer models and say, hey, this is what's going to happen, or what they think is going to happen. But it's up to us to give them the information that they need. And I think it came up earlier, we need to know not quite as much about their job as they do, but we need to know enough about it. I'm sorry, my cat just walked across my keyboard. Thanks, Leo. We have to know what they need. And honestly, our emergency managers are the traffic managers and the supervisors in the FAA. Emergency managers at the forecast offices and the river forecast centers. That's kind of the, you know, that's, there's a really strong correlation between the two. So that's probably the biggest change that I've seen in 34 years. That and the fact that the models have gotten pretty good. Sorry, I'm being attacked by a cat. So here's something to think about, and we won't necessarily talk a lot about this, but this kind of struck a nerve with me a little bit. Communication has been a big thing with me for a number of years because of what I do. Dr. Marshall Shepard is a professor at the University of Georgia, former president of the American Meteorological Society. He's a great follow on Twitter and other social media. He writes for Forbes, which is where this particular article came from. And, you know, there's a lot of really good points here. And, you know, unfortunately, the world we live in now, we live in a Twitter society. We got the attention span of gnats, you know, about 10 seconds, 8 to 10 seconds is all we got. Well, when you've got something with multiple hazards or multiple issues here, you know, how do you get the point across to people? And we fight this every day in our world. Ian was a big storm. Ian was a strong storm. It was a Cat 4, what made landfall. It was borderline Cat 5. It would not shock me upon reanalysis if they find that maybe it actually was a 5. But then again, you know, you're talking about a number. Does it really matter? You know, as much as the winds were an issue, the water was the issue, or was one of the biggest issues with Ian. Ton of rain. It was going to make a second landfall. Nobody was talking about that until Ian obliterated parts of South and Central Florida. You know, and the messaging from the Weather Service and from the media and everything was pretty good. Yet there's still, you know, well, we've all seen the damage. We've all seen what happened down there. You know, just something to think about, that, you know, when we're relating weather information, you know, we try to simplify it as much as we can, but sometimes we just simply can't. You know, these headlines kind of drive me nuts a little bit too. How in the world in this day and age can people be caught off guard by a Category 4 hurricane? If you got the answer to that question, you're way smarter than I am, because I don't have an answer to that. You got social media, you got the mainstream media, this, that, and the other thing. How did people get caught off guard? Was the forecast really that bad? They missed the center point for landfall by what, less than 50 miles? But, you know, the big topics of conversation have been about, you know, the cone. What does the cone mean? You know, Damage, as we saw with Ian, we've seen it with Sandy, we've seen it with other storms. You know, the impacts from these storms extend out hundreds of miles, but people get focused in on where the landfall of the center is going to be. Well, here to tell you, there's a lot more going on than just that. So we are so overdue in New England for a landfalling hurricane. It doesn't keep me up at night, maybe in the summertime. So this is kind of another quasi-poll question here. And there is no necessarily right or wrong answer, but I'm curious to see what people think. Which of these two outcomes do you think is more desired? Forecast is absolutely 100% spot on, or people actually use the information and respond the way they should? Anybody want to take a comment on that one? Just go ahead and open up your mic. Okay, so I got a couple of people say use the information. You know what? That's the one that I kind of lean toward. I can give you a perfect forecast. Absolutely nail the forecast. Funniest forecast I ever got right, air traffic or the airport manager in Burlington walks into the office. We got thunderstorms running around all over the place. And the old time radars, we didn't really have a good look at everything in tight because of all the ground clutter on it. Guy asked me, what time's the thunderstorm going to hit? Boom, right now. Best forecast I ever put out, most accurate. Wasn't very timely, but it was accurate. Well, maybe a little late. I think, you know, if you can get people to respond the way that they should based on the hazards that you see, I think that's really kind of that's where we kind of need. Yes, Meg, that is, I've read a little bit of that. I had to talk about Isaac Storm for one of my emergency management classes. So yes, that is a good read. And one of these days it is on my list of full reads, you know, if I ever get caught up on other things. So that is what I had planned for tonight, hour plus. I will open it up to further questions at this point. So bring them on.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Scott. That was excellent. And glad to see folks who have been asking questions along as we go here. I'm wondering, let's see. So as a reminder, if you're joining on Zoom here, you can use the Q&A button to ask some questions. I know quite a few have already. In fact, Scott, you've done such a fantastic job keeping pace with all of these questions that have come in. But give folks just a minute or two here to think of some questions. In fact, I see one from Joseph that's come in already asking, can we name a hurricane after your cat?
Well, he's actually my daughter's, but let's see if Leo is actually on the list, because the names change on a fairly regular basis.
Right. Yeah, you always hope your name doesn't come up on that list.
We got a league coming up next year. I guess that's as close as we're going to get. And Scott is not on the list, so I guess I'm safe for at least 6 more years anyway. So, you know, it's the World Meteorological Organization puts the list together, rotates through the list, and if there's a particularly bad storm, Ian will definitely qualify for retirement after this season is over. Fiona, I would imagine, is another one that will probably get retired. You know, certainly raised all kinds of problems up in the Canadian Maritimes. Yes, hurricanes do hit Eastern Canada. They're a little different animal by the time they get up there, but they certainly cause some issues. So,
you got another great question from Meg there about how other countries deal with weather and aviation. Do you see similar setups elsewhere? I don't know how knowledgeable or not you are of some other. I mean, even you deal with Canada, I imagine, and their airspace. Are you familiar?
Canada's kind of interesting because, well, Canada's air traffic system is a little bit different than ours. They went through some serious downsizing years ago, and then COVID really downsized them some more. They cut down on the number of air traffic controllers. They actually I believe they privatized their weather services. So they don't have the level of weather support, I don't think that we do. But then again, they don't have the level of air traffic that we do either. Let's face it, most of their traffic is right along the US border, give or take a couple 100 miles or so, unless you're headed up to Anchorage. So it is different now. I heard a talk from a gentleman from Meteorologist Swiss the other day. They do some things along the lines of what we do, and there may be some more information sharing between the two countries here coming up over the next few years or so. Weather information for aviation is critical, just like it is in the emergency management community, because there's so much weather related stuff. I'll give you a real quick example. A non-weather event. You may remember a certain little event that happened in 2001 called 9/11. Couldn't have happened on a nicer weather day in the Northeast. There wasn't a cloud within 500 miles of New York City. But the next day, during the beginning part of the operations down at Ground Zero, I got a call from emergency management in New York City. Hey, what do we got for weather coming up? We need to know what's going on down on the pile. You might get a couple showers. The winds are going to be, I knew the winds were critical. And I gave him all that. And he said, talk to me about these showers. I said, yeah, you're only talking about, trace, maybe, a couple hundredths of an inch of rain. He said, that's huge. I never thought about that. Throw a little rain on top of all that dust and debris. You're creating more hazards for the rescue operations. Never thought of that. It's the little things like that we have learned over the years that really make a difference. And sometimes it's something as simple as a little wind shift here and there, whether it's an aviation impact or you've got a fire somewhere, you got a brush fire and say somewhere's up north of here. One little wind shift suddenly could put a bunch of firefighters or a bunch of people in harm's way. Those kind of forecasts are absolutely critical. So the Weather Service has really made a concerted effort over the years. And to my buddy, if that's who I think it is, John Kelly, the HER is a very important piece of the equation. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's awful. It's up to the forecaster to know when it's good, when it's not, make the adjustments accordingly. We have so much other, fine scale computer guidance. It's not all just about the HER anymore. It's about other things. It makes the job much more challenging at times. But the HER is always is kind of it's the starting point for the near term stuff, and then you're looking at the big picture, and then you use the HER and the small scale stuff to try to really zoom in and hone in on the details. Sandy, are tornadoes more of a wild card? They are here in New England because we don't get many of them. We know what the conditions are to look for tornado development, but let's face it, we're not the central and southern plains. Tornadoes are much more of a challenge here because tornadoes in the east are built a little differently than the monsters of out west. They really are. ZBW Boston. The W part, I haven't quite figured that out, but Z is for all of the centers, for the artsies. And I'm gonna think about the W. That's a good question. 17 years doing this, and I don't think I've ever been asked that question before. And yeah, all of the forecasts in Canada really, were impacted by the downsizing. And this has got to be 25, maybe almost 30 years ago. It was a cost-cutting thing. Yeah. it's too bad because there's days that I really need to talk to, the Canadian forecasters to see what they're thinking. Cause I like, two opinions are usually better than one. Gary, I'm going to skip your question for a minute.
Oh, well, you got it asked twice. Even Stephanie asked the same question. So, I mean,
I'll come back to it.
And let's be fair. I mean, you work in day-to-day weather, but as we know, from at least New England's perspective, the airspace that you're working in, I mean, so warmer climates, maybe some more intense storms,
Okay, I'll go ahead and address it now.
Yeah.
I got to address it at some point. No time like the present, I guess.
Yeah.
I think it has had some impact on a day-to-day basis. Not really, but if you look at the big picture, month to month, year to year, there's more storms. There's more intense storms. Our rain snow lines in different locations than they have been. I'm a little leery on that one because, let's face it, some years, 20, oh my God, help me out, John. 2015 was the big snow year down here. We got 5 feet of snow in 3 weeks. We haven't had that since. In fact, the last 3 winters have been pretty lousy for the snow lovers in the world. I don't mind because I don't have to use my snowblower as much. I think it does have an impact. I think the impact is greater at the forecast offices and the river forecast centers, but I think we're seeing it at least in little pieces. We'll see, if you average it out over 20 years, I think that's when we're going to start really seeing a lot more of these. Day-to-day talking to Canada, boy, I wish we did, John. We really should, but getting a hold of them sometimes can be a bit of a challenge. But they just don't have the level of air traffic that we do. They really don't. TAFs. Well, if a pilot can't read the TAF, we got bigger issues. Plain language. Have you ever read our area forecast discussions? As far as when we went to plain language on those, they've gotten a little lengthy. Short, sweet, and to the point is a key phrase in my world. The TAFs will probably start undergoing some changes probably after I retire at the rate things go. They may go more graphical. The Canadians, actually, of all people, were working on some graphical aviation forecasts for, similar to TAFs 15 years ago. I don't know where that ever went. So I don't think the TAFs will ever go plain language, certainly not anytime soon. Military. The military have their own meteorologists, but they use our information just like everybody else does. We have access to a little bit of their information, so it helps. It really does. And I think I covered Stephanie's a little bit. Forecasting is difficult in my world anyway, because it's New England. It's difficult in the first place. So climate change may just make it worse.
And I know folks, so just so you're aware, Scott, I don't think other folks in the audience can see some of the questions that are coming in, but I know, so Pete asked the question about how much Mount Washington Observatory data you're looking at. And I'm curious. I know our observers, I would imagine, are joining in at the moment if they're not outside taking a knob. What are you typically looking at? What are your sort of, what when you're looking at Mount Washington data that stands out for you?
Well, it's temperatures and winds really for me. The ceilings don't really,
yeah.
And I don't mean to sound non-committal or callous about it, but air traffic up in northern part of New Hampshire, really, it's the GA population. It's really, I got bigger problems to deal with, and that's jet traffic. Where I use the Mount Washington data as much is it kind of gives me an idea of what kind of an air mass I'm dealing with. If I see the temperature at 6,200 and change feet, at 0 Fahrenheit, it's like, yeah, we're 35 degrees here in Nashua. Guess what? I'm looking at some colder air coming in. I'm looking at the winds, because those 6,000 foot winds, I can kind of correlate those a little bit to some of the other data that I'm looking at and say, okay, the models seem to be a little off on this, which I think typically they are a little low on the winds. And that may just be a local thing in and around Mount Washington as well. So,
yeah. Yeah, I know it may not exactly, mountain weather. So it's, I guess, unless you're landing a plane on top of Mount Washington, that some of it may be a bit too point specific. But
But it's still, it's another piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It kind of gives us, I look at it this way, there's not much, excuse me, there's not a lot of weather data that's irrelevant. It's, everything has its place. It's all part of the big picture, trying to put together, I walk in the door at 5:30. I've got to have my video briefing out the door in 15 minutes. I don't really get a chance to look at much. Then I've got some time to start looking at things. Now I can do that little deeper dive. The Mount Washington winds can give me a little bit of idea. All right, we're gonna have low level turbulence issues across the higher terrain. What are the temperatures doing up there? Wait a minute, they're 40 and you got 20, and it's 40 degrees here. Okay, there's an air mass boundary that maybe I didn't quite notice. Just little things that can kind of say, okay, maybe there's something I need to dig into a little bit more. So, it's like everything else, it's part of the puzzle. And, you learn when to look at things, when not to look at certain things, what to look at, what not to look at. Some days I look at the HRRR, other days I know the HRRR is going to be garbage. I don't even waste my time with it because, first of all, on the HRRR, I know when the sea breeze is coming into Boston. Our sea breeze forecasts are accurate within 1 hour of onset over 90% of the time. We've done good with the sea breeze in Boston, and part of that's because we've done some research with Plymouth State years ago on that. So we've got a really good handle on things like that, and part of it's just doing it, and you'll learn from repetition. Yep, this works, this doesn't work, and you go from there. Especially in our world where you've got to do the quick decision type stuff sometimes.
Yeah. Well, I certainly appreciate that. And, for round the clock observational data at that elevation, you get pretty slim pickings, I suppose, to be able to look at that elevation.
Yeah.
Unless you're looking at flight reports.
There's not much, especially anywhere near that elevation. Everything else is, down in the valleys for the most part, which is still useful information. Don't get me wrong. Let's get a couple of.
Yeah, maybe just one or two more here, Scott. Being mindful, certainly appreciate you staying on a little late tonight too, which is awesome.
Okay, yeah, and it's no problem there. The no name storm of 1991 was not a busy night for me, and the reason for that was I was in Burlington, Vermont, so I was about 300 miles away from the closest impacts, so I had it easy. I just watched the Boston office going crazy with that one. But I think Wendy makes a point in there talking about weather patterns. That's something that, we get so dependent on the models. It kind of, I like to think that I'm not old school, but let's face it, I am to some extent. There's a lot to be said for pattern recognition, and especially, in my world and, at a fast pace, you got to pick up on little patterns like that. So if you see something that you've had in the past, it gives you at least a starting point for different things. Transoceanic flights, weather information is a little limited once you get away from the mainland. There is a certain amount of information. We have the Kansas City Aviation Weather Center does put out a certain amount of oceanic weather information up to, I forget exactly how far east it is, and then it's picked up by one of the European centers. It might be London, it might be the ECMWF Center, which I don't even remember what the heck that is right now. So there is information in there. Is it as specific as you would get over the mainland? Absolutely not, but it's certainly enough where there shouldn't be any major surprises. We've come so far with satellite technology and onboard radar technology and just weather information in general. Air traffic should have a reasonably good idea what to expect on those long haul flights. And I can tell you, when I went to and came back from Europe this summer, zero problems. One of the smoothest flights I've ever been on. So ever get a chance to go to Rome, go. And the food is awesome. Emergency flight plans for search and rescue in the mountains. Only if there's a the only time that we would assist with those is if there may be an issue with an aircraft in the area. We may be providing information to the controllers or the supervisors for air traffic control in the area, specific search and rescue information. Honestly, that if it's like a state or federal entity, they're going to be talking to the local forecast offices. So if it's in New Hampshire, they're going to be talking to Gray, Maine. If it's eastern Maine, they're going to be talking to Caribou. We're
Even
really not.
The National Guard would reach out to them.
Yeah, the National. I've talked to the Guard a couple of times, Coast Guard a couple of times, but that's for the offshore stuff.
Yeah.
They're going to talk to the local forecast offices for the most part. And then, this ought to be a fun question here. Is temperature and wind the easiest part of the forecast as opposed to rain or snow? Well, no. It's all difficult at times. Sometimes it's easier than others, but it's New England. You can be sunny and 70 and you've still got to time out that sea breeze and get that wind direction just right, or where those thunderstorms going to develop, where's the turbulence going to be. There's really there are easy days in forecasting, but an easy part of the forecast, that's kind of a stretch. And I think this one here from Gary McDonald, this might be a good one to end on. What kind of feedback, positive or negative, do you get? Yes, both.
Yes.
Whoever came up with the phrase that 93% of all communication is nonverbal, they are not kidding. That number is just about spot on. We get feedback on our forecast almost instantaneously because a lot of our forecasting briefings, they're verbal, they're face to face. Air traffic, they know when you're full of it. When you really don't have a good handle on it, you're giving them your best bet. They may ask you, all right, give me your best case, worst case scenario. And other times they know what your best case and worst case scenario are just from a look on your face. So they are very good about the positive feedback and the negative feedback. They're good about giving us that too, but it's also done in a, shall I call it, a positive way, because we're all trying to get better. Nobody's going to blame anything for any reasons. They know that we don't have an easy job, just like controlling, these 600-mile-an-hour flying metal tubes through the sky. That's not an easy job. That's a high stress job. Makes mine look very non-stressful a lot of the time. So, it's, we take the feedback, we use it, to make ourselves better.
Well, you're right. That is a perfect place to end it. And I'll just say on behalf of everyone here, I know there's a lot of comments that you've already gotten here, Scott, but that was excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time tonight to present, to share that for the work that you do to keep folks safe in the airways. I mean, people probably don't know much about your work, I'm guessing, and how it kind of connects. You're maybe a little more behind the scenes than maybe what some folks are might typically think about. And I'll be the first to admit here, I didn't realize the scale of your operation and based here in Southern New Hampshire. So that's amazing.
Yeah, the first poll question I should have asked should have been this instead of whatever we asked. I should have said, how many people are aware that the National Weather Service actually has an office in New Hampshire?
That's what we were all joking about today in the office ourselves, wondering what people knew or didn't know. But
we used to have two, now it's one. So,
well, regardless, really appreciative, Scott. That was excellent. And for all of you joined on tonight, thanks everyone for joining. If you enjoyed the free program this evening, certainly would encourage you to make a donation to support programs like these to continue over at mountwashington.org. You find the donate button in the upper right-hand corner. Don't forget, a donation in any amount also makes you a member of Mount Washington Observatory. We have a survey following the program here. Please, if you can take a few minutes, it takes all of 2 minutes to fill out. Certainly Scott and myself would appreciate that. It'll show up in the Zoom window following the program and also in an email as well. And if you enjoyed tonight's program, well, we got another great program next month as well. Tuesday, December 6th, we'll keep things in New Hampshire here when Chief of Mitigation Recovery, Vanessa Urango from New Hampshire's Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, another Plymouth State alum there. It's going to help us learn about how to prepare for, respond to, and recover from weather-related emergencies. So don't forget to register for that program. You can check out other ones you missed over at mountwashington.org/SITM, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks again, Scott. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, take care. Bye-bye, everybody.